Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom,
Ooh, I like that.
where we like to dig into some really fascinating material and pull out the insights, the nuggets,
Yeah.
the golden nuggets that matter most to you.
Right.
Today, we are diving into the mind of Gayton McKenzie,
Oh, yes. This will be interesting.
a South African politician and businessman.
Yeah.
Who's known for, well, let's just say speaking his mind.
Yeah, he's definitely doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't.
A treasure trove of opinions,
We've got
particularly when it comes
a treasure trove of information here.
Yes. South African politics.
Yeah.
The future of the country.
From his recent interview on the SMWX podcast. And trust me, this is one you won't want to miss. But before we get started,
Yes.
do us a favor, hit that like button,
Uh-huh.
drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this one.
More deep dives. All right, so McKenzie. He's a treasure trove of opinions, particularly when it comes to the South African political landscape and the future of the country's economy.
Absolutely. And one of the big things we'll be unpacking is his perspective on the GNU,
Yes.
the governing
The
coalition.
governing coalition.
What's fascinating is that he seems to believe it'll actually stick around for a while.
Well,
Not necessarily because it's working perfectly,
right.
but because no party wants to be the one left holding the bag when it inevitably collapses.
It's fascinating because this isn't just about political maneuvering. What McKenzie observed is that the GNU partners, even though they come from completely different ideological backgrounds, they seem to find a strange sort of unity in their opposition to those outside the coalition.
It's like the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly.
He actually shared a pretty intriguing story about this.
Oh,
He was meeting with some South African billionaires in London,
okay.
and they were practically begging him to assess the GNU stability.
Wow. So if billionaires are worried, you know it's a big deal.
If billionaires are worried,
It really highlights
that's a big deal.
how interconnected everything is. The stability of the GNU has implications not just for South African politics, but for investment, the economy. You name it. It's a ripple effect that reaches far beyond their borders.
Now, when it comes to the players within the GNU, McKenzie seems to have a somewhat begrudging respect for President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay.
He acknowledges that Ramaphosa is a skilled negotiator, a peacemaker, who somehow manages to wrangle this incredibly diverse group of politicians.
To be fair, that's no easy task. The ability to bring together such a diverse group of people and build consensus speaks volumes about Ramaphosa's political savvy.
But here's where it gets interesting. McKenzie also pointed out potential weakness in Ramaphosa's leadership style, a tendency to be a bit too cautious, a little slow to take decisive action. He used the example of the government's response to attacks on foreign nationals. McKenzie felt it was too measured, not forceful enough to truly address the issue.
And then, of course, McKenzie, being McKenzie, couldn't resist throwing in a little jab. He basically implied that if he were in charge, even for a short time, things would be drastically different. Now, whether that's a genuine desire for power or just McKenzie playing to his audience is up for debate. But it definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
It certainly does. What would happen if someone with his assertive, no-nonsense style was at the helm? Would it be a breath of fresh air or a recipe for chaos? I guess that's a question for the political analysts.
Speaking of McKenzie's style, one thing that really sets him apart is his communication. He's incredibly blunt, often witty, and definitely not afraid to say what's on his mind. It's a stark contrast to the carefully crafted, often bland statements we're used to hearing from politicians.
It's almost like he's allergic to political correctness.
Right.
And in a world where everyone seems to be walking on eggshells,
Yes.
terrified of offending anyone,
Yeah.
it can be refreshing to hear someone just come out and say what they think.
He shared a couple of really revealing anecdotes that highlight this. One involved a tense exchange with a Malaysian businessman who was making some sweeping and, frankly, offensive generalizations about Africans.
Oh, I could only imagine how that went down. McKenzie probably didn't mince words.
You're absolutely right. He called the man out, challenged his assumptions, and basically shut the conversation down. He also recounted another incident where he had to confront a group of prominent Nigerian guests who were, according to McKenzie, making some incredibly disrespectful remarks about South African women.
Sensing a pattern here, it seems McKenzie has zero tolerance for disrespect, no matter who you are or where you come from.
Exactly. He confronted them head on, made it clear that their comments were totally unacceptable, and even asked them to leave.
Wow. That takes some serious guts. It's clear that he's not afraid to stand up for what he believes in, even when it means ruffling some feathers.
And this fearlessness seems to come from a genuine place. He's stated many times that he's not desperate for political office, he's not beholden to anyone, so he doesn't need to play the political game. He even told this charming story about his daughter, being surprised to see him drive for the first time since becoming a minister.
So it's not about the fancy cars or the pokes of power for him. That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah.
Especially in the world of politics where image often trumps integrity.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if more politicians adopted that mindset, if they were less concerned with optics and more focused on doing the right thing, what kind of impact would that have?
It's a fascinating thought experiment for sure.
Okay.
Now, let's shift gears for a moment
Yeah.
and talk about McKenzie's economic vision for South Africa. He's extremely passionate about improving the lives of everyday South Africans, and he sees economic empowerment and opportunity creation as the keys to achieving that.
One of the things he's particularly focused on is revitalizing school sports. He sees it as a way to foster talent, open doors for young people, and create a brighter future for generations to come. He's talking about investing in equipment, improving infrastructure, building a solid foundation for the future.
And we can't forget about his heartwarming commitment to reviving Bloemfontein Celtic, a beloved football club. He views it as a symbol of hope, a way to bring the community together, and proof that he's a man of action, not just empty promises.
It might seem like a small gesture, but it speaks volumes about his connection to the people and his understanding of the power of sport. It's a reminder that sometimes the most impactful changes start at the local level.
It's that human touch that's often missing in politics. Speaking of big picture stuff, McKenzie believes that South Africa's vast mineral wealth is the key to unlocking the economic growth and tackling unemployment. He thinks the country needs to stop relying on foreign aid and start leveraging its own resources to create jobs and build industries.
He used this really striking analogy to illustrate his point. He said South Africa needs to start using its smartness, meaning its mineral wealth,
Right.
because its sugar daddy foreign aid might not always be around.
That's such a great way to put it. It really highlights the need for South Africa to become more self-sufficient and invest in its own future.
Exactly. It all ties back to this idea of self-reliance, independence, and believing in South Africa's potential to be a true powerhouse on the global stage. He's also a strong advocate for the creative industries. He wants to make sure that artists and creatives are fairly compensated for their work and are given the support they need to thrive. He even mentioned meeting with representatives from Spotify and La Liga.
Oh, on Spotify and La Liga.
Yeah.
That's an interesting combination. What was he hoping to learn from them?
It seems like he's taking a proactive approach to understanding the global landscape of the creative industries. He wants to learn from the best, see how things are done in other parts of the world, and find ways to apply that knowledge to benefit South African artists.
So he's not just talking the talk, he's actually walking the walk.
Huh?
That's impressive.
It really challenges the perception of him as just a firebrand or a provocateur. He's clearly putting in the effort to understand complex issues and find practical solutions.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on a concern that McKenzie voiced, one that has major implications for the future of South Africa and the relationship between different racial groups in the country. He's worried that the current political climate, with all the infighting and disunity, especially among black political parties, is actually creating a dangerous situation.
His fear is that this internal struggle is inadvertently opening the door for a return to white minority rule. He contrasts this with what he sees as a stronger sense of unity among white political parties, which he believes are better at prioritizing the interests of their community.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The very people who fought so hard for freedom and equality could end up undermining their own progress through division.
McKenzie even challenged his white friends directly, urging them to speak out against any injustices they see happening to white South Africans. It's a bold move, because he's essentially saying that real progress requires everyone to be willing to confront uncomfortable truths and acknowledge the perspectives of others.
It's a call for bridge building, for understanding, for recognizing that South Africa's future depends on finding common ground across racial lines and working together for the good of all citizens.
He's basically saying that you can't change the past, but you can shape the future through dialogue, empathy, and a commitment to shared goals. Now, this raises a really important question for us to consider.
Okay.
Given McKenzie's outspoken nature, his willingness to shake things up, and his unconventional approach.
Yeah.
How might his leadership, if applied on a national scale, reshape South Africa's political and economic landscape?
That's a great question. And it's a question we'll continue to explore as we move into part 2 of our deep dive.
Ooh, exciting. Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. Before we move on, I think it's worth circling back to Mackenzie's point about unity and the potential pitfalls of internal divisions. It's something that comes up again and again in his interview, and it seems particularly relevant when you consider his stance on illegal immigration.
Right, his Abahambi philosophy.
Exactly.
It's definitely one of his more controversial stances, but it's also something he's incredibly passionate about. Essentially, Abahambi means let them go. And it reflects Mackenzie's belief that South Africa, for all its resources and potential, can't be expected to solve the entire continent's problems.
He argues that South Africa needs to prioritize the well-being of its own citizens, and that means taking a firm stance on illegal immigration. He encourages foreign nationals to return to their countries of origin and focus on building solutions there.
Now, I know this can be a sensitive topic, and Mackenzie has definitely been accused of xenophobia for his views. But he insists that his concern stems from a deep love for South Africa and a desire to see all South Africans thrive.
He makes the point that true unity and progress are incredibly difficult to achieve when a country is grappling with a large influx of undocumented individuals. It puts a strain on public services, impacts employment opportunities, and can even lead to social unrest.
He uses this really interesting analogy to illustrate his point. He compares it to a personal relationship, saying that before you can effectively contribute to a partnership, you need to be self-sufficient and stable as an individual. In other words, South Africa needs to fix its own house before it can start accommodating others.
It's a thought-provoking comparison, isn't it? It forces you to consider whether a nation that's struggling with its own internal challenges can truly be a welcoming and supportive place for people coming from other struggling nations.
So the question becomes, how does Mackenzie propose to address this complex issue?
Right.
His Abahambi philosophy isn't just about sending people away. It's about encouraging a sense of Pan-African self-reliance and development.
He truly believes that each African nation has the potential to thrive, and that the key to a brighter future for everyone lies in building strong, independent economies and societies across the continent. It's about moving away from this model of dependency on aid and assistance from more developed countries.
He envisions a future where African nations collaborate as equals, supporting each other's growth and working together to achieve shared prosperity. It's a bold vision, and it certainly resonates with a sense of pride and determination.
And it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, this idea of unity, but not just within South Africa, across the entire continent. He's basically saying that Africa has the resources, the talent, and the resilience to overcome its challenges. But it requires a collective effort, with each nation taking responsibility for its own destiny.
Now, I know this tough love approach can be difficult for some people to swallow, but Mackenzie argues that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is encourage self-reliance and empower people to solve their own problems.
It definitely pushes you to think differently about the complexities of immigration, development, and the shared responsibility we all have in building a better future for Africa. And also highlights how intertwined these issues are with Mackenzie's broader philosophy of leadership and authenticity.
Exactly. We talked earlier about his willingness to speak his mind.
Yeah.
Even if it ruffles feathers. And this is another prime example of that. He's not afraid to tackle sensitive topics head-on. He believes in open and honest dialogue, even if it leads to disagreement.
He actually told a story about a time when he was with a group of prominent businessmen and politicians, some from other African countries. There was one individual from Malaysia who started making these sweeping negative statements about Africans, basically saying they were incapable of managing their own affairs.
Oh, wow. I bet Mackenzie didn't let that slide.
You're right. He challenged this person directly, pointing out the flaws in their logic and highlighting the achievements and complexities that exist within the African continent. He refused to let those harmful generalizations stand unchallenged.
And then there was that time he had to confront some Nigerian guests who were making disrespectful remarks about South African women. Mackenzie is very vocal about his respect for women. So he immediately addressed the issue and made it clear that kind of behavior was completely unacceptable.
Again, it shows that he's not afraid to speak up against injustice, regardless of who's involved or what the social or political consequences might be. He's truly putting his principles into action.
It seems like his fearlessness stems from this deep-seated belief in personal integrity. He's not motivated by power or popularity. His driving force is a genuine desire to make a difference and to do what he believes is right, even if it's not the popular opinion.
This unwavering authenticity, while sometimes abrasive, has earned him a lot of respect. People recognize that he's not playing games or trying to manipulate anyone. He's just being true to himself and his convictions.
And this authenticity really shines through in his views on leadership. He believes that true leaders are defined not by their titles or positions, but by their actions and their commitment to serving the people they represent.
He often says that leadership isn't about enjoying the perks of power. It's about shouldering the responsibility of making tough decisions and tackling difficult problems head-on. He shared a story about his daughter being surprised to see him driving a car after he became a minister. Because she had never seen him behind the wheel, he always preferred to be driven.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about his approach to leadership. He's not interested in the trappings of power or the outward displays of status. He's focused on the work, on serving the people, and on making a real difference.
He truly believes that the best leaders are those who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty, to work alongside the people they serve, and to face challenges head-on.
It's a refreshing contrast to the image of politicians as being detached from the everyday realities of the people they represent. McKenzie wants to be seen as someone who's in the trenches, working side by side with everyday people, and fighting to bring about meaningful change.
He's not content with just making speeches or attending meetings. He wants to be on the ground, engaging with communities, listening to their concerns, and understanding their needs firsthand. It's a demanding approach, but it resonates with people who are longing for leaders who are truly connected to the communities they serve.
And it speaks to this growing desire for authenticity and action in a world that often feels dominated by empty promises and political posturing. It makes you wonder, can this type of leadership, one that prioritizes action, accountability, and a genuine connection with the people, truly transform a nation?
It's a question worth exploring and one that we'll continue to unpack as we delve into the final part of our deep dive into the mind of Gayton McKenzie.
Welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. As we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Gayton McKenzie's insights, I want to touch on a topic that's been kind of woven throughout this entire conversation, the idea of unity, and particularly unity across racial lines in South Africa.
Yeah, this is something McKenzie feels very strongly about. And, he's painted a pretty sobering picture of the current political climate. He's concerned that the infighting and fragmentation, especially among Black political parties, is actually working against the very ideals of equality and progress that they fought so hard for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost like history repeating itself in a way, but with a twist.
Right.
The divisions within the groups that fought for liberation could end up being their undoing.
Yeah.
It's a pretty stark observation.
Absolutely. And McKenzie doesn't shy away from pointing out what he sees as a double standard.
Right.
He observes that, while Black political parties are often consumed by internal power struggles, white political parties seem to present a much more unified front, consistently prioritizing the interests of their community.
He even went so far as to challenge his white friends, directly urging them to speak out against any injustices they perceive against white South Africans.
It's a bold move, and it really highlights his belief that true progress requires everyone to be willing to have those difficult conversations and acknowledge the perspectives of others.
Yeah, it's a call for honesty, for open dialogue, for recognizing that South Africa's future hinges on building bridges and breaking down barriers. He truly believes that the well-being of the nation depends on moving beyond racial categorizations and focusing on the collective good.
Yeah, it's a message that resonates with the spirit of Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
The interconnectedness of humanity.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that we're all in this together and that progress requires a shift from an us versus them mentality to a recognition of our shared humanity.
And that, I think, is one of the most valuable contributions McKenzie brings to the table. He's willing to be that voice that disrupts complacency, challenges assumptions, and pushes people to think differently about the path forward. He's not afraid to stir the pot and spark debate, even if it means making people uncomfortable. And while his approach can definitely be abrasive at times, there's no denying that he's deeply passionate about South Africa and its future.
Whether you agree with his methods or not, you can't ignore the message. He's calling for a fundamental shift in mindset, a recognition that the old ways of thinking, the old divisions, are holding South Africa back from reaching its full potential.
He's a disruptor, a provocateur, and in his own way, a visionary. He's forcing South Africa to confront its past, present, and future.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Gayton McKenzie, we'll leave you with this question. How can South Africa move beyond the divisions of the past and build a future where unity and progress are not just aspirations, but lived realities?
It's a question worth pondering, worth discussing, and most importantly, worth acting on. And remember, the path to wisdom isn't always smooth. It's often paved with challenges, disagreements, and those uncomfortable truths that force us to grow and evolve. Thanks for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom, and we'll see you next time.